Picture 11 o'clock at night on December 31st, 2020. Across the United Kingdom, millions watch the clock tick down, waiting for the exact moment the Brexit transition period officially ends and the fireworks begin. In that exact hour, while the country was distracted, a quiet piece of legislation clicked into effect. There was no press release, no headline, and no minister on television explaining what it changed. This legislation is sitting on Parliament's own website with the government's own date stamps. The official record shows it was signed off on the 29th and timed to take force at the exact moment the transition ended at 11 o'clock on the 31st. The document is written in a way that is almost literally unreadable. This complexity is intentional. This specific regulation was engineered using a series of nested legal mechanics to quietly dismantle the rules that force tax advisors to stop hiding their schemes. This timing was a calculated strategy. The government executed a deeply unpopular policy change on the one night of the decade when every camera in the country was pointing somewhere else. Large companies and wealthy individuals hire experts, specialist lawyers and accountants, to build clever arrangements that make tax bills shrink or vanish. Think of them as financial magicians who wave a wand to shuffle money off to tiny tax-free islands. For decades, these magicians relied on absolute secrecy. They could invent a scheme and run it for years because the taxman would only find out if he happened to stumble across it. Secrecy was their most valuable possession. A European rule called DAC 6 ended that secrecy. Britain embraced this, preparing for its implementation. DAC 6 forced accountants to report any tax-dodging arrangement to authorities as they built it, turning the lights on before money moved. This created an existential crisis for the tax avoidance industry, as their business depends on nobody knowing the trick. They remained under this threat until the stroke of midnight, when the government handed them the darkness back. To understand exactly what was lost at midnight, we have to map out the specific types of tax-dodging hallmarks that DAC 6 was designed to catch. The law sorted these schemes into 5 categories, simply labeled A through E. Groups A and B flagged basic warning signs, such as schemes sold under confidentiality clauses, standardized tricks sold to hundreds of clients, or the use of artificial losses to cancel out tax bills. Groups C and E covered the most damaging tools. These are the mechanisms giant corporations use for profit shifting and transfer pricing, moving brands and patents across borders to ensure they pay next to nothing here. Group D was more specific, flagging schemes used to hide who really owns an asset or to get around the international systems countries use to share bank account information. Together, these 5 groups formed a comprehensive dragnet that protected the public tax base from almost every major form of corporate financial engineering. Returning to that December midnight law reveals a startling detail. The legislation contains 0 actual rules of its own.
It is an editing tool. Its only function is to reach into earlier laws and redact specific words to change their meaning. This works through a Russian doll architecture. At the foundation sits the original 2011 European law on tax cooperation. The 2018 DAC 6 update was built on top of that, and the 2020 UK implementation law was built on top of the update. Each layer relies on the one beneath it. Then, in the final hour of 2020, the government placed the Midnight Amendment at the very top of the stack. From its position at the peak, this top layer executes a targeted strike, legally erasing the core tenets of the transparency rule in the layer beneath it. This legislative complexity is intentional. The state uses this architectural density to ensure massive corporate deregulation remains illegible to journalists and the public. When we translate those legal redactions back into the real world, the result is an asymmetrical purge of our tax protections. The rules targeting mass-marketed schemes, loss canceling, and massive corporate profit shifting were wiped out. Only Group D was surgically saved from the purge. We have to ask why the government saved the banking information rules while trashing the protections against corporate profit shifting. This was regulatory arbitrage. Group D was the baseline required by a separate international agreement from the OECD, which Britain was trapped into keeping. The UK kept only the bare minimum required to avoid international repercussions, while quietly throwing away every domestic protection they legally could. Defenders of the government point to a new law passed in 2023 as proof that tax transparency was eventually restored. These are the mandatory disclosure rules, which supposedly replaced the original European standard. This chart reveals the reality of that replacement. It perfectly mirrors only the isolated OECD-mandated rules of Group D. The massive corporate loopholes in the other four categories never closed. The 2023 law formalized the gaps created on Brexit night. It ensured that while one specific international requirement was met, the broader loopholes for corporate profit shifting remained wide open. The money lost to corporate profit shifting is not an invisible, abstract figure. It represents billions in sheltered wealth. Economics is a zero-sum reality. Every pound a corporate tax magician hides is a pound that must be found somewhere else, usually from the budgets for schools, roads, and hospital beds. Things that are popular get done in daylight, with press releases and grinning photos. Things that would disgust the public get done at midnight, with the lights off. They buried this legislation in the dark because a politician cannot stand in front of teachers and nurses and justify protecting the secrecy of elite tax advisors. For years, the public was told that this political transition was about ordinary people taking back control. The first concrete exercise of this new independence protected the secrecy of the tax avoidance industry, leaving the public to pay the direct cost of the missing revenue.